MRI today confirming Giants quarterback Daniel Jones has a torn ACL. Jones will miss the remainder of the season for the 2-7 Giants. DeVito as the QB for New York, but Daboll would not commit to him.
There were many important games that took place yesterday, from CJ Stroud's rookie record performance to the Dallas Cowboys being defeated by the Philadelphia Eagles. A video on that's coming out soon, by the way. But if you want to see what my earliest take on the situation is, you can check me out on Twitter. But the first video I wanted to make, the first story I wanted to cover, was none other than what happened with Daniel Jones and the New York Giants, because it's a very complicated situation. The Giants could go a multitude of ways with this, and above all else, it sucks. I mean, a man tore his ACL and is out for the season. He didn't really go out on the best note. So before we get to the content, make sure you drop like, subscribe, and turn on our notifications to help the channel grow. Now that we got all that out of the way, break! Leading up to the season, I spammed predictions at you guys consistently. Michael Porter Jr. needed over 5.5 rebounds in his season debut. Tyreek Hill just needed a touchdown, and Steph Curry just needed 1 point. Shout out to those that tailed. For those of you guys that were able to make money, we're giving away our picks for free all season long for the NBA and NFL on my Instagram at @TheFlightMike. And right now, when you use promo code Mikerophone on PrizePicks, they'll match your deposit up until $100. Thank you, PrizePicks, for the sponsor. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? If you want to see a controversial offseason, go all the way back to 2019 and take a look at what the New York Giants did. That offseason, they decided to move on from their most popular football player in over a decade by trading Odell Beckham Jr. to the Cleveland Browns, in addition to their recent standout Olivier Vernon, and got Jabril Peppers, Kevin Zeitler, a first-round pick, and a third-round pick in return. Immediately, New York Giants fans were livid. Odell Beckham Jr. was without a doubt their most electrifying player in quite some time, and to move on from him after 5 seasons, especially because this fan base had no faith in Dave Gettleman, their general manager at the time, this decision didn't necessarily make Giants fans feel optimistic about their future. But this did mean that the New York Giants would have 2 first-round picks in the 2019 NFL Draft. The Eli Manning era was over, and it produced phenomenal results. 2 Super Bowl rings over Tom Brady. Now the New York Giants were looking for their next man under center. And when they selected their next man under center with the number 6 overall pick, well, most Giants fans reacted this way.
New York Giants just took Daniel Jones over Josh Allen.
Haskins.
Daniel Jones.
Daniel mother. Oh! No! Let's go!
Daniel Jones.
So it doesn't take a genius to know that most Giants fans really weren't excited about this draft pick at all. Either that, or it's just a culmination of the fact that you didn't really hear much of Daniel Jones going into the pre-draft process, and the player that was ranked higher than him at the time was the late Dwayne Haskins, may he rest in peace. A lot of Giants fans wanted Dwayne Haskins over Daniel Jones at the time. I think that, coupled with the fact that Daniel Jones wasn't considered as the second best QB prospect, the fact that Giants fans lost all faith in Dave Gettleman in general, and the fact that Daniel Jones' skill set didn't really excite many fans. I mean, the scouting report on him pretty much said that he was a very solid dink and dunk quarterback that didn't possess tremendous arm strength, was very accurate, was mobile, and only completed 59.9% of his passes while he was at Duke University. However, a lot of his wide receivers would drop wide open passes, and I guess that was enough for the Giants to select him. At the time, Daniel Jones' head coach was none other than Pat Shurmur. Now, Daniel Jones would thrive in his rookie year, taking over for Eli Manning in week 3, and then never letting go of the starting QB position, throwing for 24 touchdowns and 12 interceptions, 3,000 passing yards, completing 62% of his passes, but also he had a knack for fumbling the ball. In addition to this, he added 279 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground, which, despite a losing record, validated the New York Giants' decision to select Daniel Jones in the 2019 NFL Draft. But going into the 2020 season, there were a lot of hopes for Daniel Jones. Now, in the offseason, the New York Giants made some significant changes to their coaching staff, and I swear you can't make this stuff up. As a team that was lusting for any type of success and seeing how successful the Bill Belichick coaching tree has been historically, they decided to hire Bill Belichick's special teams coach to be their head coach. Yeah, they hired Joe Judge to be Daniel Jones' second head coach during his NFL career. And in order to make sure Daniel Jones truly had the greatest opportunity to be successful, they decided to pair him with a man that was truly a thorn in the NFC East. Well, to at least the team that he was coaching, making Jason Garrett Daniel Jones' offensive coordinator. For the life of me, I don't understand how Jason Garrett still keeps getting jobs. I mean, it's truly remarkable to see. Every single time I watch him doing some sort of pregame show, he always has this smile on his face like, I don't know how I got here, but I'm here. And this was definitely one of those instances because the 2020 New York Giants had one of the worst offenses in the league. But also, in Daniel Jones' defense, he didn't necessarily have the greatest wide receiver core or the best protection. Regardless, Daniel Jones would put together his worst season of his career, throwing for 11 TDs, 10 interceptions, 2,900 passing yards, but also getting sacked 45 times, rushing for 423 yards, and also fumbling the ball 10 times. For some reason, despite the worst season of Daniel Jones' career, the New York Giants felt like they had to bring back Joe Judge. Now, after a below average 2021 season, where Daniel Jones would throw for 28 passing yards, 10 touchdowns and 7 interceptions, but with a 64.3% completion percentage, the New York Giants decided that Joe Judge wasn't their guy. And on top of that, their general manager, Dave Gettleman, would also retire. Now, typically, whenever there is a quarterback that has been failing underneath the previous regime, whenever a new regime comes in, you'd expect that quarterback to be ousted. And when GM Joe Schoen was brought in, that's what many people were expecting. There were individuals that thought Brian Flores and Deshaun Watson were going to team up on the New York Giants. But eventually, Joe Schoen and John Mara would state that Daniel Jones really never had an opportunity to succeed with the New York Giants. Now, during the 2022 offseason, I personally believe the agenda here was that Daniel Jones was still on a rookie scale contract. Why would you want to give up on him when you could take an additional season to assess the type of player he is? And if he doesn't work out, then you could potentially take a shot at Bryce Young or CJ Stroud during the 2023 NFL draft, which was my theory. But what ended up happening was the New York Giants would bring in Brian Daboll, an offensive coordinator that is credited for Josh Allen's remarkable development from essentially a running back at the quarterback position to, well, the player he is now. And between that and intelligent draft decisions like Kayvon Thibodeau and Evan Neal, although Evan Neal is taking some time to work out clearly, but at least these draft decisions were a little bit better than, I don't know, some of the decisions Dave Gettleman was making. We started to see an upward trend for the New York Giants. In the 2022 season, Daniel Jones was able to lead the New York Giants to the playoffs for the very first time in his career. Not only that, they were able to defeat the Minnesota Vikings. On a contract year for himself, Daniel Jones threw for 3,200 passing yards, 15 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, which gave him the lowest interception percentage of his career, had a 67% completion percentage, but also added 708 yards rushing on the ground and 7 TDs on the ground. This is where I thought the New York Giants made a mistake because their immediate reaction to this was signing Daniel Jones to a 4-year, $160 million contract. But while on paper, that doesn't really look like the smartest decision. When you really look at the contract, it's actually a really brilliant contract, and I'm going to take us through it in a sec. They decided to sign Daniel Jones to what is a short-term contract and run it back for the 2023 season. And that's where we are currently. And this is where things get a little dicey. Going into the 2023 season, once again, Joe Schoen made some very intelligent decisions. They drafted Jalen Hyatt, which was essentially a dart thrown at the dartboard for the New York Giants. They retained Darius Slayton and Isaiah Hodgins. They signed Paris Campbell. They re-signed Sterling Shepard. And most importantly, they traded for Darren Waller. And they didn't really have to give up much to trade for Darren Waller. All the New York Giants had to give up was a 3rd-round pick in exchange for Darren Waller, who would would be a remarkable security blanket for Daniel Jones. Hell, they even pretty much stole a player that was a top 10 draft pick from the Arizona Cardinals for a 7th round pick. And typically, I don't really grade general managers from their moves always panning out. I just need to see the direction and the vision and at least have the roster transactions making sense. And at the very minimum, I thought Schoen was a huge upgrade over Dave Gettleman, because even if Evan Neal doesn't pan out, I understand why you selected Evan Neal in the 1st round alongside Kayvon Thibodeau. Even if Darren Waller doesn't pan out, you gave up a 3rd round pick to see whether or not it will pan out. And ideally it does pan out, because that's what makes or breaks general manager careers. At the very minimum, for the very first time in Daniel Jones's career, he had a general manager and a head coach that would put him in the best position for him to succeed that he possibly could. And this is where deciding whether or not this is the end of Daniel Jones gets a little tricky. You see, on one hand, in the beginning of the season, when Daniel Jones would play, we saw some pretty horrific games from Daniel Jones. I mean, of course, there was that famous game against the Seattle Seahawks where he threw a pick 6 to Devin Witherspoon. I mean, this performance was terrible, and he was overthrowing wide receivers. He didn't really have a lot of time in the pocket either, and it was truly one of the worst games that Daniel Jones has ever had. And looking at his tape even made it worse. I mean, if you look at this all 22 footage, you could see Wan'Dale Robinson quite literally begging Daniel Jones to throw him the football, but Daniel Jones just misses him despite looking in that direction, by the way. And this performance was so bad that you had Brian Daboll looking at Daniel Jones disgustingly and throwing the iPad, and even Brian Daboll asking Daniel Jones whether or not he wants the New York Giants to fire him. There are moments like that, and that's one of the arguments for getting rid of Daniel Jones, because maybe he's just a terrible QB. But then you also realize this is a guy that has had horrible luck this year. I mean, Saquon Barkley injured his ankle, Darren Waller injured his hamstring, Andrew Thomas injured his hamstring, Michael Schmitz injured his shoulder. Daniel Jones would eventually injure his neck and then come back and then tear his ACL. This brings us to the main point of this video. What should the New York Giants do now that Daniel Jones is out for the season? On the more human side, obviously, my heart goes out to Daniel Jones. This is a very difficult injury to rehabilitate, and he's in a very difficult position once again. I mean, the right moves were made, it just didn't pan out for him. A huge regression after a remarkable season that is causing Adam Schefter to say this, by the way.
Team right now goes right back into the quarterback market. Right now is worst case scenario. People in the building would never admit this or acknowledge this, but the best thing they could do is lose games right.
And at the same time, Ian Rappaport to say this.
But it is a little bit of a blessing. If you are going to get a franchise quarterback, and I think the jury still is out on whether or not Daniel Jones is, only way to get one of these really good guys at the top of the draft is to be horrendously bad. You could set yourself up for the next 10 or 15 years. For better or worse, that's maybe the Giants' reality.
This brings us to the main question of the video. Is this the end of Daniel Jones? What should the New York Giants do? Rap Sheet and Schefter both agree that they should lose games and try to get themselves Caleb Williams or Shedeur Sanders. You guys already know what my fundamental team building philosophy is here. In order to really understand the situation, you have to take a look at Daniel Jones's contract. Daniel Jones's contract extension was a 4-year, $160 million contract extension signed last offseason. And in 2024, that contract is fully guaranteed. Well, it's practically fully guaranteed. It's a $36 million contract, but $35.5 million is guaranteed. But in his second year, Daniel Jones once again has $11 million guaranteed for injury in 2025. Following the 2025 season, the New York Giants could get out of his contract altogether, which is probably what's going to happen. So if you're the New York Giants, what should you do? Here's the problem with the modern NFL. When you go to ownership and say, hey, I need like 2 years to build the perfect team for you, typically the owner isn't going to be cool with that. They're going to want results immediately. And the most ideal case, what I would do if I had like 3 years to rebuild the New York Giants, is you have to stick by Daniel Jones. You could lose out games this season, but I wouldn't take my QB of the future this season, ideally. Obviously, if you're in a situation where you have the #1 overall pick, you don't really have a choice but to take your QB of the future there, especially because because this is one of those drafts where people are saying Caleb Williams is the next coming of Patrick Mahomes. But Caleb Williams, Drake May, or Shedeur Sanders would all probably love to play with the New York Giants. Brian Daboll also gets to pick the prospect that he would like to build his offense around. So if you're within the top 3 picks in the NFL draft, I could understand why that would be the direction you want to go in. But at the same time, it seems like people forget that there are other really good prospects aside from Caleb Williams, Drake May, and Shedeur Sanders in this year's NFL draft. For instance, you could select Olu Fashanu and probably move Evan Neal to a guard position because he so far doesn't look like a really good offensive tackle. You could select Marvin Harrison Jr. and finally figure out your wide receiver situation, which has been a huge question mark for the New York Giants for the longest time. Personally, if it was me, I would not select a quarterback when there's so many other problems on my team, because it seems like for the New York Giants, it's a consistent cycle. You can't just select a quarterback and throw him into a situation where he doesn't really have the greatest players to throw to, has an inconsistent offensive line, has a running back that is phenomenal but is always injured, probably because that offensive line is very inconsistent, and then expect it to be any different with a brand new shiny QB prospect. Especially because whenever you bring in that quarterback on a rookie scale contract, you have 5 years to compete and have a championship window when other aspects of your team are fixed. And when I look at the New York Giants, I don't really think it's that difficult to fix this team. You gotta fix the offensive line, which I think is 60% there, by the way. It's not perfect, but I think the right draft pick this offseason could fix it. And you need to find a true number 1 wide receiver that would make your quarterback's life significantly easier. So a player like Marvin Harrison Jr. comes to mind here. This QB class is going to be so deep that if you want to select a QB in the 2nd round, but I feel like if you keep going after quarterbacks with top 5 picks and you keep putting quarterbacks in this particular situation, you don't have any stability at the head coaching position, and you're giving him offensive coordinators like Freddie Kitchens and Jason Garrett to work with, then any quarterback would fail in this position. I do think that Daniel Jones could be a good quarterback in this league. I don't think the Giants put him in a situation to be a good quarterback in this league. I feel like they need to figure out other parts of their offense before finding their next QB. But of course, at the end of the day, the fan base is probably going to be clamoring for a brand new QB because they think Daniel Jones is the only problem there. And don't get me wrong, he is part of the problem, but there are other things that I believe the Giants need to fix before they move on from Daniel Jones, especially if they're going to have to pay him money anyway. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. If you're a Giants fan, do you still believe in Daniel Jones? Should he be the starting QB next year? Or are you hoping that you guys could tank for Caleb Williams or select Drake May, maybe Bo Nix, maybe take a shot at Spencer Rattler later on in the NFL draft? I'd like to hear what you have to say. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.